I always believed family was supposed to be the place where you were safest, the arms that held you when the world turned cruel, the voices that defended you when others tried to break you. I thought blood was thicker than water, that no matter what storms life brought, those closest to me would stand by me. But I was wrong. I learned painfully that sometimes it is your own family who sharpens the knife, your own blood who waits in silence while the floor is pulled from under you. And when it happens, when the betrayal comes not from strangers, but from those you trusted with your whole heart, it shatters something inside you that may never fully heal. It began quietly, in ways so subtle I almost didn't notice. I should have seen the signs, the uneasy glances, the small evasions in conversation, the way my in-laws started showing unusual interest in the property papers that had once belonged to my father. At first, I brushed it off. They were family, after all. Why would I question them? Why would I think that the people I shared meals with, the people who claimed to love me, would ever wish me harm? But betrayal always creeps in like a shadow before it consumes you. My father had left behind a piece of land, nothing too grand by city standards, but precious to me because it carried his sweat, his love, his dreams. That land was more than soil. It was memory. It was legacy. And though it came to me by right, I never wore it like a crown. I saw it as responsibility, something I had to preserve not just for myself, but for those who would come after me. But to my in-laws, it was nothing more than wealth waiting to be snatched. They began pressing Armin, my husband, whispering in his ear, sowing seeds of doubt. Why should she keep it all? They would say, when they thought I couldn't hear, she's just one person. This family deserves a share. At first, Armin defended me, or at least I believed he did. He would smile at me reassuringly, saying, "Don't worry, nothing will happen. It's yours." And I clung to those words like a lifeline, not realizing he was already starting to bend under their weight. Weeks turned into months, and I noticed more signs. Imran, my brother-in-law, suddenly grew overly interested in helping with family paperwork. Salma, my sister-in-law, began making comments about how land should benefit everyone, not just one person. Even Armin's mother, a woman who had once held my hand like a daughter, started keeping a colder distance, as though she was already preparing to see me as an outsider. I tried to push away the unease, to focus on life as it was. But unease has a way of digging deeper the more you ignore it. And soon the whispers turned into shadows. Shadows turned into silence, and silence into actions I could no longer ignore. One evening, while sorting through documents, I stumbled upon papers I had never seen before. Property deeds, stamped and signed, except something was wrong. The signatures didn't look right. My name was there, but the curves of the letters were stiff, unnatural, almost as though someone had copied them from memory. My heart raced as I examined them closer. My own inheritance, the land my father had entrusted to me, had been quietly shifted into their hands, or at least that's what they had tried to do. They had forged my name. I remember the moment so clearly. My hands trembled, My throat tightened. The room spun. I couldn't breathe. It was one thing to suspect greed, another to know they had carried it out with cold calculation. Every dinner, every smile, every polite word from them replayed in my mind, and all I could see was deception. I confronted Armin that night, my voice breaking. "Did you know about this?" I asked, showing him the papers. He hesitated. Too long. Far too long. His silence was my answer. My knees went weak. It wasn't just them. It was him. The man I had built my life with, the man I had trusted most, had stood by and let this happen. His words were feeble, unconvincing. They pressured me. I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe it would be easier if he trailed off and I realized he wasn't defending me. He was defending them. In that moment, my world cracked. But anger has a way of sharpening pain into clarity. I would not let them erase me. I would not let them take what was mine. If they thought they could bury me under lies, they would soon discover I was not soil to be trampled on. I was stone, and they would break themselves against me. The days that followed were filled with quiet planning. I gathered every document, every piece of evidence, every whisper of proof that their scheme was nothing but a fraud. I went to the registrar's office with my heart pounding in my chest, not knowing if they would laugh at me or believe me. But the truth has a way of carrying its own weight, and when the forged documents were laid out side by side with my real signature, the difference was undeniable. Their scheme began to unravel right there. Under the bright lights of authority, I wish I could say I felt relief in that moment, but what I felt was something darker. Betrayal is not washed away by justice. Betrayal lingers, a poison in the veins. And as I stood there, exposing their lies, I felt not triumph, but fury. Fury at the time I had wasted trusting them. Fury at the nights I had defended them to myself, telling myself I was imagining things. Fury at Armin, who could not even meet my eyes as the truth came crashing down. When the registrar declared the forged papers invalid, the silence in the room was deafening. My in-laws stood frozen, their faces drained of color. The whispers began almost immediately, clerks leaning toward one another, people in the waiting hall craning their necks to see. The story spread like wildfire, faster than I could have imagined. By the time we walked out, everyone seemed to know. They had tried to steal, and they had failed. It should have ended there. But betrayal does not vanish with exposure. It festers. It grows. It leaves scars that change the way people look at you, the way they speak to you, the way they think of you. And for them, the fallout had only just begun. The registrar's office that day felt less like a bureaucratic building and more like a courtroom, where the soul of a family was on trial. I can still see the way Salma's lips trembled when the officer held up the forged deed, the way Imran's shoulders stiffened as if bracing for impact, the way Armin's eyes darted between me and the papers, silently begging for an escape that would not come. There was no denying what had been done. The ink itself testified against them. When the officer slammed his stamp onto the valid document, mine, The real one, untarnished by lies. It echoed through the hall like thunder. That sound, that heavy thud, felt like a line being drawn in stone. My land was mine, and nothing could erase that truth. Yet, as I left the building with the folder clutched in my hands, I knew that this was not the end. This was only the beginning of their downfall. Because humiliation, once revealed to the public eye, does not stay confined within four walls. It seeps into the streets, into conversations, into the bones of a community that, by the next morning, whispers had spread across the neighborhood like wildfire carried by the wind. In the bazaar, shopkeepers paused mid-transaction to lean closer to one another, muttering, "Did you hear? Imran and Salma tried to steal from her. Forged her name, they say." At tea stalls, men shook their heads in disgust, their voices low, but their words cutting. What kind of family does that? Greed so deep it eats its own. I didn't need to add fuel to the fire. The truth had already lit it for me. All I had to do was stand tall, walk through the streets with my head held high, and watch as the same people who once dismissed me now looked at me with something different, respect. But for them, my in-laws, it was the start of a slow and merciless unraveling. Salma, who had always carried herself like the queen of the market, draped in bright colors and loud laughter, now walked quickly, eyes fixed on the ground. People stopped greeting her. Shopkeepers who once rushed to offer her the best produce suddenly had nothing left. She became invisible. And in a society where reputation is currency, invisibility is poverty, Imran faced harsher blows. His business, which had thrived on trust, started to crumble. Longtime partners withdrew deals without explanation. Clients who once praised his reliability now found excuses to go elsewhere. And when whispers reached even his suppliers, they began to demand advance payments, something no businessman in our town could withstand for long. He raged, of course, storming into shops, demanding loyalty, threatening those who turned away. But his words had no teeth anymore. Trust, once broken, is harder to repair than shattered glass. I remember one particular day when I stood at the spice stall buying cumin. Imran walked past, trying to keep his head high. Two men nearby, their voices not quite hushed, sighed. "That's him, the man who tried to rob his own sister-in-law. Shameful." Imran's ears flushed red. His fists clenched, but he kept walking. Because how do you fight whispers when everyone knows they're true? Armin's mother withdrew almost completely. Once she had been the matriarch, her sharp voice filling every gathering, her opinions treated like law. But now she stayed inside most days, peeking through the curtains when footsteps passed, her world shrinking to the four corners of her sitting room. The few relatives who still visited came only out of obligation, their conversations short, polite, empty of warmth. Her pride had been broken, and with it, her power. And then was Armin, my husband. He was different from the others in one way. He carried his guilt not on the outside, but on the inside. The betrayal had hollowed him. He spoke less and less each day, until our home was filled with silences heavier than arguments. Sometimes I would find him sitting at the edge of the bed in the dead of night, his shoulders hunched, his face buried in his hands. Other times I would wake to the sound of him whispering prayers, as though asking God to undo the past, to wipe away the stain of his choices. But prayers do not erase signatures on forged deeds. He tried, in his way, to mend things. Once he brought me flowers, wilted roses he must have bought on the way home, their petals already browning. "Let's start over," he whispered, his voice breaking. But I only looked at him and said softly, "You can't rebuild a house on a foundation you tried to destroy." The roses stayed in their vase until they crumbled into dust. Our neighbors noticed his decline. "He looks like a ghost," one woman murmured as I passed her gate, "as if he's carrying a weight he can't put down." And they were right. He was carrying a ghost, the ghost of trust he had killed with his own hands. What they hadn't expected, what none of them could control, was how their betrayal had backfired not just on themselves, but on their entire social standing. Relatives stopped inviting them to weddings, to birthdays, to Eid gatherings. Those who once sat beside them now chose other tables. Even when people smiled at them, the smiles were thin, the kind reserved for those you cannot trust. Their names had become tainted, spoken in hushed tones as a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, I rose. I took the land they had tried to steal and turned it into more than property. I fenced it properly, planted trees, and worked with women in the village to start a cooperative that gave them income from the crops. Slowly, the barren soil became alive, buzzing with work and possibility. And in the process, I became more than just a woman who had been betrayed. I became a voice. Letters began to arrive from women in nearby towns, from cousins of friends, from people I had never met. Stories poured out of brothers who erased sisters' names from wills, of husbands who sold land without telling their wives, of in-laws who pushed women aside as though they had no rights. Each letter carried pain, but also something else, hope. "We saw how you stood," one woman wrote. "You showed us we can fight too." That was when I realized my revenge was no longer just mine. It had grown roots, spreading into places I hadn't imagined. Their attempt to silence me had instead amplified my voice until it echoed beyond our family, beyond our village. And the louder it grew, the smaller they became. But the true slow burn of revenge is time. Months passed, and their decline deepened. Selma stopped wearing her bright clothes, her laughter disappearing from the air. Imran, once so proud, was reduced to pleading with creditors, his voice low and desperate in ways I had never seen before. Armin's mother stopped cooking elaborate meals, as though even her kitchen had lost its joy. And Armin, he aged years within months, his hair thinning, his face etched with lines of regret. He left notes for me sometimes, folded pieces of paper by my bedside, apologies, promises, please. I read them all. Then I put them in a drawer I never opened again. Forgiveness is not something you owe to those who tried to erase you. Sometimes the most powerful justice is to let them live with the weight of their choices. The gossip evolved over time. At first, it was a scandal. Did you hear what they tried to do? Then it became pity. Look how far they've fallen. And finally, it hardened into legend. Parents told their children the story of the greedy in-laws who tried to steal and ended up losing everything. A living lesson, repeated until it was no longer just gossip at folklore. By the time a full year had passed, everything had reversed. I stood taller, stronger, with respect in places that had once dismissed me. And the family who had tried to erase me flinched at the sound of my footsteps, but the reckoning was not yet complete. There was still one more moment, one gathering where the story would reach its final peak. A family event was approaching, one where every relative, every elder, every voice of importance would be present. I knew that it would be there, in that hall, that the last thread of revenge would be woven into place. The hall was alive with voices when I stepped inside, a sea of relatives dressed in their best, their chatter bouncing off the walls in bursts of laughter, gossip, and greetings. It was a wedding, the kind of event where the entire family, even the most distant cousins, gathered under one roof. Children ran between tables, their laughter high and bright, while elders leaned on canes, their eyes scanning the crowd for familiar faces. And in the middle of it all, at the front, sat the very people who had once tried to erase me, Salma in a muted sorry that failed to hide the hollowness in her face, Imran fidgeting with his watch, his jaw tight, Armin's mother with her eyes downcast, and Armin himself, shoulders slumped like a man carrying an invisible weight. They had no choice but to come. To stay away would have been its own admission of guilt, a louder statement than their presence. But as I walked in, as every eye turned toward me, I could feel the shift in the air. Whispers started, subtle at first, then louder as my steps carried me further into the hall. It wasn't my dress, though I wore it with quiet confidence. It wasn't even my posture, tall and unflinching. It was the story that walked in with me, the story everyone already knew, the one that clung to me like a second skin. I took my seat at a table near the front, directly across from them. For a moment, our eyes met. Salma widened, then darted away. Imran tried to hold my gaze, but faltered when he caught the smirks of two men behind me, men clearly savoring his downfall. Armin looked at me the longest, his eyes heavy with something between apology and desperation. But I did not look away. Not anymore. The ceremony went on, laughter and music filling the air, but underneath it all, a current hummed. Relatives eyed the in-laws from corners of the room, their whispers as sharp as knives. "That's them," I heard one woman say. "The ones who betrayed their own blood." Another man shook his head, murmuring, "If they can do that to her, what would stop them from doing worse?" And though no one said it aloud, the truth was obvious. Their seats were occupied, but their place in the family had already been emptied. Then came the moment that sealed everything. After the bride and groom had been blessed, the elders called for blessings from the family. One by one, relatives came forward, offering prayers, handing gifts, placing their hands on the couple's heads. When it was the turn of Armin's family, silence fell. People shifted in their seats, eyes narrowing, waiting, because everyone knew this was not just a blessing, it was a test. Would they dare stand tall, pretend nothing had happened? Salma rose first, adjusting her sari nervously. She walked forward, her hands trembling as she reached to place them on the bride's head. But before she could, the bride's mother, her own cousin, stepped forward, intercepting her with a smile that was kind on the surface but sharp beneath. "Thank you, Salma," she said, her voice carrying just enough for the nearest tables to hear. "But let us keep the blessings pure." Her hand gently guided Salma back. Salma froze, the color draining from her face as whispers rippled through the crowd. She sat down quickly, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. Imran stood next, his face already flushed. He walked forward stiffly, but before he could speak, an elder at the groom's side cleared his throat. "Trust," he said loudly, his voice like gravel, "is the foundation of family. Without it, blessings lose their weight." The words were aimed like arrows, sharp and unmistakable. Imran faltered, his mouth opening but no words coming. He turned back, his steps slow, each one heavier than the last. Armin's mother didn't even try. She remained seated, her eyes wet, her head bowed as though she had already accepted her place outside the circle. And Armin, he lingered for a moment, torn between duty and shame, before finally lowering his head and staying in his seat. The silence around them was deafening. I felt the eyes of the room shift toward me. An elder nodded, beckoning me forward. My heart pounded, but my steps were steady as I approached the bride and groom. I placed my hands gently on their heads, my voice soft yet strong as I offered my blessing. "May your home be filled with love and honesty," I said, the words deliberate, each syllable carrying its weight. "May you never know the pain of betrayal, and may your bond always stand stronger than greed." The hall was silent, listening, and when I stepped back, the applause erupted, loud and unrestrained, echoing against the walls. It wasn't just for the bride and groom. It was for me, for my stand, for the truth that had cut through lies and pride. I turned and walked back to my seat, my chin lifted, my steps light. Behind me, I could feel the heat of their shame burning into my back. They sat stiffly, their faces pale, their place in the family shattered before everyone's eyes. No harsh words were spoken, no dramatic accusations hurled. The judgment had been delivered in silence, an exclusion, and the simple act of denying them the role they once took for granted. And that silence was louder than any shouting could have been. From that day on, their decline accelerated. The relatives who had once tolerated them now avoided them openly. Invitations to gatherings stopped arriving. Business associates cut ties completely. Even the mosque committee quietly asked Imran to step back from his role. Citing concerns about trust, they became shadows, living on the fringes of a community they once dominated. Armin tried to bridge the gap, visiting relatives, pleading quietly for understanding, but doors closed faster than they opened. I watched him return home one evening, his shoulders heavy, his eyes hollow. "They won't even listen," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "They just shake their heads and walk away." I said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. His choices had written his story long before that day. And as I sat by the window that night, listening to the distant hum of the town, I realized something profound. Revenge had not come in one grand explosion. It had come in layers and slow ripples that spread wider and wider until they engulfed everything they had built. It had not been about screaming or fighting, but about truth standing taller than lies. And that truth had done more damage than I ever could have planned. The weeks after that gathering felt quieter, as though the storm had passed and left behind a sky scrubbed clean. I would wake early in the mornings, step outside, and watch the sun spill over the land, my land, bathing the fields in gold. There was a peace in those moments I had not felt for so long, the kind of peace that comes not from forgetting the pain, but from knowing you endured it and came through stronger. Life didn't transform overnight. It never does. Pain doesn't vanish just because the truth has been spoken. Scars don't fade simply because the world has turned in your favor. But slowly, steadily, I began to feel lighter. Each day I worked the soil, planting trees, tending to the crops. I felt myself reclaiming not just the property, but my own sense of belonging. It was as though the earth itself whispered back to me, "You were always meant to be here. This was always yours." The community began to see me differently, too. Neighbors who had once looked at me with pity now came to me for advice. Women, especially, would knock on my door, sometimes bringing tea, sometimes just bringing their stories. They told me of their own battles, brothers who had shut them out of inheritances, fathers who had favored sons, husbands who treated their contributions as invisible. Each story carried weight, but also a question unspoken. How did you do it? How did you stand when they tried to break you? I never pretended it had been easy. I told them the truth, that there were nights I cried until my body ached, mornings when getting out of bed felt like lifting a mountain, that I doubted myself, that I feared being cast out, that I almost gave in. But I also told them that strength does not come in grand gestures alone. Sometimes it comes in the smallest acts, signing your name on a paper when your hands tremble, speaking one sentence of truth in a room full of lies, walking into a hall where you know every eye will judge you and refusing to bow your head. And little by little, those women began to change. They spoke louder in community meetings. They asked questions about their rights. They refused to be silenced when men brushed them aside. Some even pursued their own cases, citing mine as the spark that gave them courage. My fight had been for my land, but the echoes of it traveled far beyond my boundaries. Meanwhile, the family that betrayed me drifted further into isolation. Salma, once so quick with sharp words and sharper plans, rarely left her house. I would see her sometimes at the market, her eyes darting nervously, her shoulders hunched as though she feared every whisper, every glance. Imran's business collapsed completely. Debts piled, and with no one willing to trust him, he sold off what little remained just to survive. People didn't curse him aloud. They didn't need to. The absence of respect, the withdrawal of community, was punishment enough. Armin was perhaps the hardest to watch. He aged before my eyes. His once bright face grew gaunt, his voice subdued. He tried, in halting ways, to mend the bond between us, bringing small gifts, offering to help with the land, even just sitting near me in silence. But I could not give him what he wanted. Forgiveness, yes, because I could not live chained to hatred. But closeness, trust, those had been broken in ways words alone could never fix. We shared a roof, but we no longer shared a life. And that truth hollowed him out day by day. There were moments I pitied him. Moments I wanted to reach across the gulf and remind him of the man he once was before greed clouded his judgment. But pity cannot rebuild what betrayal has destroyed. And so I let him be, letting him wrestle with the shadows he had chosen. In time, the gossip about them faded, not because people forgot, but because their fall had become a settled fact. They were no longer news, no longer scandal. They were caution. Parents told their children, "See what happens when greed blinds you." Elders would nod toward them as examples, not of success or respect, but of the cost of betrayal. And that, I realized, was a fate worse than being cursed. As for me, my life blossomed. The land thrived. The trees I planted began to take root, their branches stretching wide, promising fruit for years to come. I started a small initiative with local women, teaching them about property rights, helping them with paperwork, connecting them with honest lawyers. Some said I was too bold, that I was inviting trouble, but I only smiled. Trouble had already come for me, and I had faced it down. What more was there to fear? Letters began arriving too, not just from nearby villages, but from towns far away. Women wrote to me about their own struggles, their betrayals, their stolen inheritances. Some simply wanted to be heard. Others wanted advice. And though I could not solve every problem, I read every word, answered every letter, because I knew what silence felt like. I knew what it meant to scream into the void and hear nothing back. And through all of it, I realized something I had not understood before. Revenge is not always about destroying those who wronged you. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living well, refusing to let their betrayal define the rest of your life. Sometimes it is about turning your pain into power, your scars into seeds. Did I still feel the sting when I remembered those forged papers, those smug faces in the registrar's office? Of course, wounds leave marks, and mine were deep. But when I looked at the life I had built, the peace I had claimed, the courage I had sparked in others, I realized those marks had become part of a larger story, a story not of loss, but of survival. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of fire, I stood at the edge of my land, watching the wind ripple through the fields. And a thought rose within me, clear and undeniable. They had tried to bury me, to erase me, to reduce me to nothing. But what they forgot was that I was not a stone to be buried. I was a seed, and from the soil of their betrayal, I had grown into something stronger, something uncheckable. So here I stand, no longer defined by what they did, but by what I became. And if you, listening now, carry your own betrayal, your own wound, remember this. You are stronger than they think. Your voice matters more than they believe. And though the road is long, though the nights are heavy, there will come a day when the sun breaks through and you will rise too. That is my story. That is my revenge. And that is my truth.